Some stories don't need to be told in grand gestures or loud words. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments that carry the most weight, like the soft sound of a doorbell chiming or the sight of a small boy carrying a bouquet of flowers day after day, with a secret he's not yet ready to share. The doorbell chimed softly as the young boy walked into the flower shop, his small figure almost swallowed by the oversized hoodie he wore. It was the kind of afternoon where the sunlight spilled through the shop windows in golden streaks, casting a warm glow on the colorful array of blooms displayed around the room. Despite the gentle hum of life outside, the boy's entrance brought with it a peculiar kind of energy, a mix of purpose and hesitation that immediately caught the cashier's attention. Sophie, the shop's cashier and owner, glanced up from arranging a bouquet on the counter. She had been in the flower business for years and could read people like an open book. Most customers came in with clear intentions, a bouquet for a birthday, an apology, or just because the flowers looked too lovely to resist. But this boy, he was different. His wide, curious eyes scanned the rows of flowers as if searching for something very specific, something important. "Hi there," Sophie said, her voice warm but curious. "Can I help you find something?" The boy hesitated for a moment before stepping closer to the counter. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. His sneakers slightly scuffed, his hair tousled in a way that suggested he'd just come from school. He pulled a crumpled bill from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "One bouquet, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anything pretty?" Sophie smiled, her curiosity piqued. "Of course," she replied, quickly assembling a small arrangement of daisies and baby's breath. It wasn't the most elaborate bouquet in the shop, but it was cheerful and sweet, much like the boy himself. She handed it to him carefully, watching as he held it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for something far more precious than a handful of flowers. "Who's the lucky recipient?" she asked lightly, hoping to coax out a bit more of his story. The boy's cheeks flushed a deep red, and he quickly shook his head. "It's a secret," he mumbled, clutching the bouquet to his chest as if to guard it from prying eyes. Without another word, he turned and hurried out of the shop, the bell jingling softly behind him. That should have been the end of it. A sweet, fleeting moment in Sophie's day. But the boy came back. The very next afternoon, at almost the exact same time, he walked into the shop and asked for another bouquet. And then, the day after that, and the day after that. Each time, he brought the same crumpled bill, asked for anything pretty, and left with the bouquet cradled in his arms. Each time, he refused to say who the flowers were for. Sophie couldn't help but wonder. Was he buying them for his mother? A sick relative? A secret crush? The possibilities danced around in her mind, each one more intriguing than the last. She started to pay closer attention, noting the way the boy's expression softened whenever he looked at the flowers, the way he held them as if they were the most precious thing in the world. There was a story here, she was sure of it, and the more the boy returned, the more determined she became to unravel it. One particularly quiet afternoon, Sophie decided to press him a little further. As she handed him his usual bouquet, she leaned over the counter and smiled. "You know," she said, "I've never seen someone love flowers as much as you do. Whoever you're giving these to must be very special." The boy's eyes darted up to meet hers, a flicker of something, panic, maybe, crossing his face. "They are," he said quickly, then bit his lip as if he'd already said too much. He glanced at the door, clearly eager to escape. Sophie held up her hands in mock surrender. All right," she said with a laugh. "I won't pry. But if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here." The boy hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Then, just as he always did, he turned and hurried out the door, the bouquet clutched tightly in his hands. And then, one day, everything changed. The boy arrived as usual, but this time he seemed different. There was a heaviness to his step, a shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He placed his crumpled bill on the counter, but instead of asking for anything pretty, he hesitated, his gaze fixed on the flowers, as if he couldn't bring himself to speak. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked gently, her concern immediate and genuine. The boy looked up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Can you make it extra special today?" he whispered. "It's the last one." Sophie's heart clenched. She didn't know what last one meant, but she could feel the weight of it in his voice. Without asking any more questions, she set to work, creating the most beautiful bouquet she could. She added roses, lilies, and a touch of lavender for comfort, wrapping it all in a delicate ribbon. When she handed it to him, the boy's hands trembled as he took it. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. Before she could stop herself, Sophie blurted out, "Wait, who are they for? Please, I just want to understand." The boy hesitated, then looked at her with an expression so raw and vulnerable it made her breath catch. "They're for someone I miss," he said simply. And with that, he turned and walked out of the shop. But Sophie couldn't let it go. Something about his words, his demeanor, the sheer pain in his eyes gnawed at her. She made a split-second decision, grabbed her coat, and followed him out the door. What she discovered when she caught up to him would change everything. Sophie kept her distance, careful not to startle him. The boy's steps were hurried but deliberate, and she noticed he clutched the bouquet as though afraid it might disappear. Her heart pounded as she followed him through the winding streets, past bustling shops and quiet alleyways, until they reached a small, unassuming park. The kind of place most people walked by without a second thought. The boy stopped near a lone bench under a sprawling oak tree. Sophie watched from a safe distance as he knelt by a small patch of earth where the grass had been worn away, revealing a neat square of dirt. Her breath caught as she realized what it was, a makeshift memorial. There was a simple wooden cross embedded in the ground, its surface weathered and rough. Around it were faded trinkets, a small teddy bear, a few wilted flowers, and a picture frame that had been turned face down, its image hidden from view. The boy carefully placed the fresh bouquet at the base of the cross, his movements slow and deliberate. He knelt there for a moment, his head bowed, his small frame trembling. Sophie could feel the weight of his grief from where she stood, an ache that seemed too heavy for someone so young to bear. Tears pricked her own eyes as she watched him. She wanted to go to him, to say something, but she hesitated. This was a private moment, one she had no right to intrude upon. But as she turned to leave, her foot brushed against a stray pebble, sending it skittering across the pavement. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sophie's heart raced as she searched for the right words, but before she could say anything, the boy's face crumpled. "Why are you here?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Sophie took a tentative step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to. I wanted to make sure you were okay." The boy's shoulders sagged, and he looked down at the ground. "I come here every day," he said quietly. "I bring her flowers because she loved them. They made her happy." Sophie's chest tightened as she pieced together the fragments of his story. Who was she? she asked gently. The boy hesitated, then reached for the picture frame at the base of the cross. He turned it over, revealing a photograph of a young woman with a radiant smile. She looked so full of life, her eyes sparkling with joy. "She was my sister," he said, his voice trembling. "She used to take care of me. She always made me feel safe." Sophie felt a lump rise in her throat. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person," she said softly. The boy nodded, clutching the picture frame tightly. "She died a year ago," he said, his voice barely audible. I don't want her to think I forgot about her. So I bring her flowers every day. It's the only thing I can do." Sophie's heart ached for him. She knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're a good brother," she said, "and I'm sure she's so proud of you." The boy looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears. "Do you think she knows?" he asked. "Do you think she can see the flowers?" Sophie smiled through her own tears. "I think she sees them," she said, "and I think they make her very happy." The boy's lips quivered, and he leaned into her, his small frame shaking as he finally let the tears fall. Sophie held him, her own tears mingling with his, and for a moment they simply sat there together, two strangers brought together by grief and the quiet power of love. The boy's lips quivered, and he leaned into her, his small frame shaking as he finally let the tears fall. Sophie held him, her own tears mingling with his, and for a moment they simply sat there together, two strangers brought together by grief and the quiet power of love. From that day on, Sophie made it her mission to ensure the boy never felt alone in his journey. She began leaving little notes with the bouquets, messages of hope and comfort that she hoped would bring him a small measure of peace. And though the pain of loss would never fully fade, they found solace in knowing that love, even in the face of heartache, could still bloom, just like the flowers they cherished so deeply.